and today we will talk about a brief history of the Pure Land Buddhism and the rise of the Pure Land Buddhism, how it transitioned from the original Buddhism in India to China and to Japan. In the early days of Buddhism, there was only one form, and then it transitioned into different forms, and then eventually it became Devotional Buddhism. Devotional Buddhism here, essentially you put more faith in the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas. Not only in China and Japan or in Asia that worship Amitabha and Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin Pusa, Wangtian Bhutan, but also in India that the worshipping of Amitabha started hundreds of years even before it started in China. But they did not exist as independent schools. It was just a general aspect of Buddhism to worship Amitabha because they knew about the teachings of the Amitabha from the Infinite Life Sutras that they worship Amitabha, but it was not an independent school. A devotion to the Buddha such as Amitabha and Maitreya Bodhisattvas was recommended by Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was a philosopher, Buddhist philosopher, who arguably could be said that he revived Buddhism with his work as Mahayana. But before that, the movement was already started, but he really was the one that put the wheels in motion, if you will. Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal was still adhering to Indian traditions. But only in China and Japan, when it started to cut the umbilical cord to be separated from the mothership, if you will, and developed its own movement of devotion to Amitabha, thriving and vigorous enough to do so to become its own school. There were other bodhisattvas and Buddhas who were very influential too, such as Ksitigarbha, Dizang Pusa, Lietang Vung Bota, and Samantabhadra, Puxian Pusa, Bohing Bota. They were very influential too, but they could never rise themselves to the status of independent schools. But incredibly, it was Amitabha that rose to become his own school. The worshipping of Amitabha later on became as Pure Land Buddhism. Speaking of devotional Buddhism, it was in effect referring to the worshipping of Amitabha. Even though that was widely spread in India, but not until it got to Japan and China that became its own school. And it was because of the work of the seven fathers, or 祖师, 斗师. Those seven patriots really made a big impression on the Pure Land school. The first two fathers are Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu Shi Xin Pusa, Taitang Bota. They were very influential philosophers. Nagarjuna was the founder of the Mayamaka. Mayamaka, you can say, is the start of Mahayana, Ta Cheng Bo Jiao, Dai Tu Phật giáo. And later on, you have Vasubandhu. He was the originator of the Yogacara, mind only, Wei Shu, which is a very interesting subject of its own. And then you have other patriots here. But all these were natives of China. According to Japan's history, these seven here did not have one very important figure in China. And that was Hui Yuan. Perhaps it was because he lived before the second patriot, Vasubandhu, Shi Xin Pusa. But anyways, he lived before about 333 to 416 CE. Vasubandhu, Shi Xin Pusa came later on. So there's a little difference between Chinese history and the Japanese history. And it could be also where Hui Yuan was left out from Japanese history was probably because although he was responsible for bringing up that school, but he did not make big contributions because his goal was to be reborn in the Western Pure Land. So maybe he didn't make big contributions to the study, to the school. So maybe that's why he was not recognized as one of the major figures. But anyway, there was a pond in his monastery, and it was said that he would never cross the pond. And that pond had white lotus flowers and became known as the White Lotus School. So the white lotus flowers are a prominent feature of life in the Western Pure Land, the Happy Land. The lotus is a representation of the birth of those who are reborn in the Western Pure Land. So perhaps the white lotus flowers reminded him and the co-practitioners of the beauties of Sukhavati, Jila Sijie, Sukha, as opposed to dukkha, dukkha is cool, right? Sukha is the opposite. So Dukkha is, you can say, suffering, but Sukha is happiness. So it's a happy land. And other destinations, such as the ones illustrated by Shan Dao Dashi Ting Liao, who lived between 1613 and 1681 CE. And it's called the White Path. He has a very famous commentary on the visualizations on the Infinite Life Sutra, 观无量寿经 One Volume Talken, where he likened the chanting of the mindfulness of Amitabha is like walking along this white strip. And you can see on the right-hand side, it's deep, bottomless body of water, which represents selfish craving. And then on the left-hand side, you have flames torturing those who are staying here very long. So they want to cross as soon as possible under the encouragement of Shakyamuni Buddha. And of course, that is the teachings of the Infinite Life Sutra. And of course, the person here crossing it is the Pure Land practitioner. And all those on this side of the white stripped pathway are, you can call, wrong views, wrong understanding, wrong practice of Buddhism, holding knives and weapons, including monastic folks. You can see here, so not only lay people, but also monastic folks too could have wrong views. Master Shan Dao said, it's best to focus on Amitabha and try to cross this as soon as possible. Don't be wasting your time here where you could be influenced by wrong views and get stuck. So that was very influential commentary on the visualization on the Infinite Life Sutra. Under Huiyan's school, which was the White Lotus School, later on, now today, we know it as the Pure Land School. And the fact that in India, the movement of devotion to Amitabha never existed independently, but in Japan and China, it is now its own school.